Hello and welcome. I'm speaking on social media and smartphones today. My name is Amber Schroader. I'm the founder and CEO of Paraben Corporation. You can follow me at Twitter at Ginger Wonder Mom. You can also follow Paraben Corp at Paraben Corp on Twitter. So, the biggest thing to think of when you're dealing with social media is, of course, you've got to make sure that you're part of it. So these are some of my favorite memes I've seen come out for the last little bit. I think Dolly Parton put out my favorite with the LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, and Tinder to kind of show the difference of what it's like to exist in all these different social media accounts. There's a lot of different etiquettes out there, and the thing is, social media is all about trends and what it's going to change. And so when you deal with it, you have to kind of stay on top of those trends. If you're not currently on social media, I really recommend you should be, because over 3.75 billion people are on social media and their primary point of access is through their smartphone. So you know you're getting a lot of information off of their device when it comes to their social media accounts. This has increased even more once Corona hit the world, because everyone was living in contact with others. So the thing that they turned to was social media, and that's how they felt that they still had connection to other individuals. So, as I mentioned, 91% of use of social media is done off that smartphone. So you know that's a critical piece of evidence that you need to look at when you're doing your examinations. Whether you're a digital forensic examiner or you're an investigator, I want to make sure I mention things that are going to be helpful to both of you out there, so that you get the details you need to really get a value out of your social media evidence. So when I think of smartphones and social media, it always reminds me of peanut butter and jelly. It's the perfect combination. It makes everyone happy. And that's what you're kind of looking for with your evidence, is you're trying to find that perfect combination of what you're going to get off the device and then what you're going to get associated with the social media account. When you do that, I'm going to show you 3 primary techniques to be able to accomplish that, and 3 different data sources, essentially, that you can get social media information from. So our first step, and I got this great preservation request from one of my colleagues, is make sure your preservation requests and what you're asking for from the social media providers or in your examination, you need to make sure that they're actually in context for everything that you could be looking for. I think a lot of times we forget to add all of the digital aspects into our requests that we do. So make sure you're looking for computers, cell phones, smartphones, SIM cards, cell phone backups, any other electronic media, from USB drives to media cards to cloud storage accounts and cloud app accounts. So make sure you really have updated all of your paperwork to really represent the full scope of what is digital nowadays. Step 2 in your process that you've got to look at is how you're going to actually seize the mobile data. And that's not where I'm going to focus the majority of my presentation on. I'm really going to focus it on the social media artifacts. But just as general rule of thumb for seizing the mobile data, make sure you're maintaining the device, you're blocking the signals associated with it, gather up your cables and accessories with it. Again, you never know when something is a connection point to some other piece of evidence. Make sure you're using a proper tool. So a digital forensic tool, don't use something that just randomly came off the internet. You want to make sure you're using something in context to what your goal is, which is digital forensics. And then make sure you're following those proper acquisition steps, because those repeat procedures and those steps are really key, because that's what makes you a science as opposed to an art. When you're dealing with a smartphone, always keep in mind, especially with social media where it's changing by the second, that you need to be aware of the wireless connectivity of the device. You're dealing with a live piece of evidence, and you're dealing with live data when it comes to social media, because it is truly changing every second. So remember those 2 types of wireless devices, which are push wireless and pull wireless. When we're dealing with mobile devices, we're dealing with push wireless devices, which means we can't control the signal that they're getting from the tower, so we have to make sure we're controlling the device. The way that we do that and stop any potential contaminators is we're going to use Faraday bags. That's really the methodology that is not only common, but it's also what is recommended. The Supreme Court has even mentioned them in some of their comments on their rulings. Things you want to watch with those contaminators are remote kill commands that might be happening. They can happen with either iPhones or Androids. Watch out for enterprise devices. So if they're part of a corporate network, they have the ability to actually take a kill command directly from those servers. And when they take a kill command, it's truly an erasure. It's the deletion through an overwrite command of all the data on the device. That's why you use the Faraday bags. I have the Faraday bags that Paraben has. The reason I feel okay in putting them in there is that we are the patent holder of the Faraday bag, the EMI shielding bag. So it's important to know that your bag is going to be able to protect through the variety of devices out there, through the regular smartphones as well as the larger size devices, because the larger the battery on the smartphone, the higher chance it's going to have of being able to escape a lesser quality Faraday bag. So be very careful. There's a lot of Chinese knockoffs when it comes to Faraday bags. So you really want to make sure you're seeing the details, such as attenuation charts and what range of signal you can block with them. So what do you do when things aren't perfect? Things haven't been preserved right. Your device is not in the best state that it was. Make sure you're keeping the device blocked. There's so many different signals that can come into it. Make sure you've got airplane mode with Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, and near field turned off if that's your methodology, and you're making sure they're turned off manually and you're recording that you've done that, because sometimes you might not have a Faraday bag and you have to make the best. Make sure all the signals are off. Super important. Make sure you're also getting consent for the cloud data. There's a lot of gray area associated with the cloud right now because we haven't had a lot of legal precedent to establish what's going to happen with cloud acquisitions. So what we've done in our private sector lab is that we have a separate letter of engagement associated with the cloud accounts, and we have our clients go through and sign that separate consent. If you have a device and you are in a consent state in your law enforcement and you're doing your acquisition in kind of that 20-minute window that you're dealing with where they're still okay with you looking at their device, make sure you get one for their cloud as well. And then, of course, starting chain of custody. So with consent, again, I am not a lawyer, and so please keep that in mind. These are simply recommendations based on experience that we've had. You need to make sure you're receiving consent for all different areas of the cloud. So for iOS, we have iCloud storage. With Android, we have Google Drive, we have OneDrive, we have Dropbox, and of course we have apps. So make sure whatever consent agreement that you're having them sign, you're having it sign it in context of all of the aspects of cloud. So what can a device store? It's kind of nice now we really only have to focus on 2 different types of devices. We have to focus on Apple and we have to focus on Android. And we are going to let some of the others kind of go the way as they are not common out in distribution. So the first thing you have to understand with both Apple and Android is understand what your baseline is on the data. So know what data you should be getting every time when you're dealing with the acquisition of these devices. So your tools should be getting you the basic information I have here, such as the SMS, the MMS, contacts, calendar, notes, web history, media card, so on and so forth. So that's what you should get every time. If you're not getting that from the labs you're working with, or you as a lab are not getting that data, it's time to look at alternative tools because this is kind of the basic. With an iPhone, you can get data through logical backups, encrypted backups. You can do both of those with iTunes. It's very similar in the acquisition procedure that your tools are going to do. And then your physical acquisitions nowadays, the best methodology out there is to jailbreak. So make sure many of you all have free lawyers, which is always an advantage to you, that you're doing permission in there to be able to jailbreak the device. You can get a ton of extra data from it just by going through that one simple process. For Android, you can get logical and physical acquisitions. The difference is with a physical acquisition on an Android is you're going to get that data through typically interacting directly with the chip, and you're going to be doing a chip dump. A chip dump is what allows you to see a physical representation of all the space. It can also do a methodology to be able to bypass different passwords. But at the end of the day, what we're really focusing on is our app investigations and getting into that nitty gritty of understanding what apps are on the device. And in this case, we're going to focus on the social media ones and how we get that information out. So social media is an interesting thing in the fact that it deals with it based on an age range. So each age range is going to kind of interact with different social media platforms, and it's going to store its data the same based on each age, but it knows kind of what you're looking for based on the age of your suspect. So I'm sure many of you wonder, how many apps does an average person have? I know I have actually lost sleep over this as I do a lot of smartphone investigations, but on average, a person has about 120 apps that you're going to be looking at. Probably about a quarter of those are all going to be associated with different social media platforms. So you know you're going to get this data. Even my grandmothers, they use social media. So you know it does not matter on the age. You're going to see it on just about every person. So I'm going to walk you through a 3-step approach on the best way that you can get access into the different social media through multiple acquisition choices and multiple data sources, because a lot of times one is not going to work out, and so you need to have backups for it. So our first one is device access. I talked a little bit about the seizure and the acquisition side of smartphones in the beginning, but this is really what number 1 is about, is being able to do a traditional digital forensic exam on a smartphone. This is where you're going to do a logical, a physical, or you're going to deal with a backup record associated with the device. The backup is typically done with iTunes, so do make sure you still have a copy of iTunes in your lab because it is in process of being discontinued. And this is your acquisition steps you do. You might use a variety of different tools out there. You might use Paraben's tools, you might use Celebrate, you might use Magnet, you might use XRY. There's lots of different choices. But do make sure that those tools are fulfilling that expectation of that baseline I brought up earlier, because you want to make sure that they're giving you what you need. Otherwise, it's time to make a switch. For iOS in particular, I think that a lot of you need to make a procedural change. And that procedural change is you want to make sure that you're always doing an encrypted backup as well as doing a traditional logical image. The reason is an encrypted backup is really where we're starting to see some shifts happening with the firmwares. Those shifts in firmwares are making it so data is not available through a traditional backup method. So a traditional logical examination is not going to get you the data you need, but an encrypted backup with a known password will. And that's what's allowing a portion of that file system that we need to access for apps to be unlocked. It also allows you to access information such as keychain data, which can be hugely valuable to your investigation. So make sure you're getting that as part of your process. For those of you who are getting data from other labs, make sure that this is part of the process of what they give you. Otherwise, you're really missing out on some good and valuable information. Once we have those acquisitions done, that's when we're going to go through and start reviewing the different app data. So this is an example for you. I did screenshots because I wasn't going to do it live in the recording, but when I acquire the device that I'm working with, as you can see up here, I have an Android attached to it. I can select the Android device, and then once my acquisition is done, in the tool I'm using, and I'm using E3, which is Paraben's tool, I can go through and see all the different apps listed out. One of the reasons I like this is that I have the ability to not only see the apps, but I'm going to know the location for the data associated with the apps in a very simple, obviously it's in a grid here, for me to go through and say, oh, my tool isn't parsing this, I can manually do that. And I don't want anyone out there to be really intimidated by that. You do not have to be a nerd like myself to be able to parse out that manual data. You just need a little bit of patience. It's like putting together a puzzle. You're not going to get all the pieces to lay down immediately. You might have to look through them a little bit. So our second option is associated with the cloud. Again, I am not a lawyer, so those of you who are lawyers and you're watching this, there still is a lot of gray area. We're just kind of waiting to see what's going to happen with it. But with cloud access, make sure you have the credentials for the account, which they can provide in that consent stage. You can ask them to write down their credentials. A lot of people will, thinking that there's nothing wrong with it. They're kind of in that adrenaline rush of having an investigation done. So make sure you can get those credentials. Occasionally, you can get those credentials from their device themselves. Then you need to decide of whether or not you have a legal right to access that data. You end up with spare keys on a smartphone of when I've accessed my different social media, and that allows me to access into their cloud account. So there is that option as well. You are going to log into the account with your forensic tool, and your forensic tool will actually do the imaging. The nice thing is, depending on what forensic tool you're using, you do have the ability to limit the scope. So you can really truly say, I've only been investigating this person for the last 2 months, and so I need to make sure that the scope of my investigation out of the cloud is only going to be for the last 2 months. Because remember, when you access the cloud, you are accessing 100% of the data available in that account. So, the cloud. It is probably the biggest mystery out there, and people just kind of wonder what it is. I always refer to it as the cloud is really just someone else's computer. When you're dealing with a smartphone in the cloud, though, you're really dealing with two aspects of the cloud. You're dealing with a public cloud, which is where different apps are going to store their information, and then more of the private cloud. And that's when you deal with the Apple devices, because it's going to be iCloud. What makes it a private cloud is you know that those cloud machines or those other computers are owned by Apple. So they're not co-located, they're not living in AWS, they're not in any of the other options. You know that they are Apple's. And so that's what's making them private. So when we process the cloud, and I always love good comics about the cloud because everyone has different perceptions of it. It was funny, my mom originally thought that the cloud, she's like, so they have it somewhere in a high location, is that why it's called the cloud? Little things like that. And I was realizing that it was very hard for her to perceive that it really was just someone else's computer. So here's my importation of the cloud. In this case, I'm actually going to do it through an authentication file. So this is one of the spare keys that I received as part of my forensic image. I add those spare keys in this case it's an authentication data file, because this is what the E3 tool uses. I'm then going to be able to open that authentication file, and within that authentication file I'm going to see a variety of different cloud accounts that have left spare keys on my smartphone. And one of the things to note on this is that you'll see that it's two different people's accounts with those spare keys. Spare keys from the cloud are left through a variety of different methods on the device, so it might not always be your suspect. This is where you have the ability to change the scope of what you're going to be investigating so that you're not taking data that you might not be privy to. As you then authenticate, which I'll go back really quickly, and you see in that bottom quadrant right here, that authentication button there is really what forces it to go and talk to another server. So that's what's allowing me to talk to the cloud. Once that authentication happens, I've talked to the other server, it's authenticated that the spare keys are legit and they can connect in. And then I have the ability to then pick my scope. So in this case, I was doing an investigation on Nikki. I can select either a date range associated with my investigation. I can change out what details I want on them. So I'm only allowed to see what their friends are, their newsfeed, their different conversations they've had. All of those, I can pull that information straight out of Facebook. I can then import that data and it will pull that information in, and then I get to review it. And you will find a huge variety of details associated with it. Facebook is notorious for being able to store a ton of different information. Part of the reasons is all their remarketing services that they do. So you can expect a good fair share of data coming from the cloud. The cloud authentication keys, different ways that you can get them, and you'll see that we have up there Amazon Alexa, Discord, It's a different social media. I'm not going to deal with it in this presentation. I'll actually have to have a separate one just about Discord. Facebook, Google Locations, Google Mail, Google Drive, Twitter, all of these different things. So cloud data isn't always limited to just social media. As you can see, I have things like Amazon Alexa on there, but it's a variety of different data. When you have an iOS device, since I showed you an example of an Android, you cannot get those authentication keys or spare keys I've mentioned that allow you access into the cloud unless you have made that encrypted backup. That encrypted backup function that happens with iTunes is the only way that you go through and generate those spare keys. Without those, without that encrypted backup, you can't actually capture that information. Our third option is really about compliance access. So compliance is an interesting thing that's really happened the last couple of years with GDPR and with the requirements in California for data protection. A lot of the manufacturers or providers, I guess I should call them providers, of social media are now having to be compliant as well with the different rules for data access. With that change, it has allowed us in digital forensics and in digital investigations to gain access to that data as well. So here are kind of the caveats you have to be able to gain compliance access. So you'll need the credentials for the account first off. So I brought that up with the cloud access, and I'm bringing it up with the third option with compliance access. Having the credentials is key because that's what's going to allow you to go in and submit for access for this data. You can get consent to access it as well. What you will do is you'll log into the account and you'll request a compliance archive. If you're working with a victim as opposed to a suspect, this is a really great option for you because they're working with you so they can do this request, and it allows you to kind of get that perspective from their side of it because you're going to see all of the data interactions back and forth. The delivery will then happen to the email address on record, and then you download it and you'll process it. So here's an example for you from Instagram. So I'm logged into my account, and then I go into settings, and then all I have to do is do a data download and say request download. I agree to the download request. I wait for an email. They typically produce the archive within 24 to 48 hours, so it's a really fast production. Again, if you're dealing with a victim, definitely go through this process with them because you're immediately going to be able to see what information they might have to further decide what your next steps are in your investigation. Then I'm going to add the archive, in this case under the social media option within the E3 tool. And then I'm going to be able to review the data directly in the tool. It's going to open it up and break it down into its different data areas. And you're going to see information such as their profile information, the photos. Again, remember this is Instagram. Videos they might have done, conversations they've had on Instagram. All of that's going to be available to you. So you will hear me mention the E3 tool multiple times. It's not in promotion of it. One of the nice things is, for those of you who have very small budgets, is we actually have a free version of the tool that deals with a lot of social media. So it's one of those things I like to put out for the community. So you can actually process social media archives, compliance archives, free within the tool. And you can also do Facebook from the cloud free within the tool. So you've got a couple of options, and I will show that to you. If you do have questions on the download, I'll have my email address at the end, and I can direct you to where the download is so you can immediately start getting work with your own tools to be able to do investigations, and there's no cost. So when we look at our top social media platforms, the one thing to really note here is that the top three just kind of rotate with one another. So you're going to see TikTok, that's definitely the hottest platform right now, Facebook and Instagram. So we know that based on this information, those are our three primary areas that we're going to be looking for data from. I'm going to go through each one of these just so you can see them as well as some of the others out there. So our first one is going to be TikTok. So I actually joked that I should do a TikTok for this entire section, and I was like, no, my corona hair is not working. So I decided to just go for it. So TikTok is a Chinese social media platform that has essentially gone viral. Some of the things to note about TikTok is the level of access it has into your device. I do always recommend that on your testing device, not on your personal device, is that you make sure you run the social media app and understand how it works. So that way you're going to have the best perspective for the type of data you should be getting. TikTok is not the cleanest app out there. It has a lot of access to your device, and it does have some security concerns if I were looking at it from that perspective. It has full access microphone, camera, all of your photos, your phone, all of your identity information, etc. The other settings, things that you might want to watch out for is it can actually keep your device on, it can control your flashlight, little things like that, and you're like, what? But it also can automatically start running as soon as you turn on your phone. Little things like that. That's where some of that security concern comes in. From the TikTok perspective, as far as data use, so this is on our compliance side, they do not have a compliance archive option with TikTok, which I thought was very interesting. But then I, of course, had that epiphany, oh yeah, they're based in China, so they're not really going to care if they're compliant or not. They do collect your information and they share it with their service providers and as a collective group. At the end of the day, social media, as much as we would like to all believe it's about being social with one another, it's really about data mining. And so it's about that information they collect and then they sell off to someone else, some other provider. So when we look at TikTok and forensics, you're going to have access into the file system. I brought that up as kind of one of your baselines that you should have access with your tool. And the big reason for that is without file system access, we can't see a lot of that app data. So make sure you're getting it. With TikTok, it's under this branding of Musical.ly because it was an upgrade. It was a change when it was bought out and turned into something new. We see the data we get from TikTok is pretty raw, and you're like, that is not pretty and not easy to go through. It might not be perfect, but you still get a lot of information, and that's the important part. Sometimes you just have to take those extra couple steps. TikTok is still a SQLite database, and so we can still look through and review that information. So in forensics, we see a lot of different SQLite databases. And I know a lot of you who are not nerds just put your fingers in your ear and you're like, I don't want to listen to her anymore. She has SQLite stuff. That sounds complicated. It's really not as complicated as you think it is. It's kind of looking at a bunch of spreadsheets if you want to kind of bring it down to a really simple level. And it's a matter of matching up those columns and the data in those spreadsheets with the other spreadsheets. And so you kind of put those pieces together. So here's an example of that. So this is one of those spreadsheets. Again, I know it's not super pretty, but every tool doesn't parse every piece of data out there. So sometimes you do have to do it by yourself. You'll see a row, which is telling me my piece of data. The sender ID and all of that information is not done out. So if I were following Thor on TikTok, it does not say that the sender was Thor. It just gives an ID number for it, but then it does actually read the content in here. So one of the things I want to point out is, of course, you can see things like Joker sticker, Tom Hanks hello gift, hi. We did some test data with this, so another hi in here. We see the combination of what we're talking about. The message cannot be seen. This is TikTok because the user isn't following you. And then we also see text, your dog us cute, which is probably just a typo of your dog is cute. This is what our users actually talk to one another about, because you can leave comments on each other's TikTok videos. You can't do it unless you follow one another. So that means that we know that the person had to have been following them to be able to leave the message back and forth. So that data is going to show in two different areas. Our next one we're going to deal with is Facebook. So with Facebook, and you can see I have a different option up here because I've got my number 1. So we know we're going to deal with it as an acquisition. So this is what data I'm going to get if I do a logical acquisition from the device. I do want to point out that Facebook Messenger is a separate application, and that data is not something we're looking in context here. It is stored independent, and it will show as a separate app within your acquisition. So just real quickly on this one, we see I can get my current settings associated with my Facebook. I get my recovered settings, my contact information that I have in there, and I can even get some of those current settings is going to be like my news feed and different things like that. So that's where you see the number as 779. So there's a lot of data for you to go through with Facebook off just a logical acquisition. On your second option, which I mentioned to you, that E3 free edition will allow you to do the cloud option, which is our second choice here, that you can type in the credentials and immediately capture that data from the cloud. This is when it gets cleaned up a little bit and I get that general profile information and get my education, my work expertise, those things that are part of my profile, the different friends I'm connected to, any notifications I've had, my news feed, and then those conversations that I might have had on Facebook. With the third option, because Facebook has the capability to do all 3 that I've mentioned, so I can do acquisition method, my cloud option, or my compliance archive. Again, with their credentials, I can go in, download the compliance archive, and then you see all the information that I can get. It actually has more information in the compliance archive than it does in any of the other choices for data. And it does that because this is kind of where that big data or that marketing data really comes up, from the ads that have been served up to me on Facebook, to the things I have liked, any payments I have done. I contribute to some dog rescues through Facebook, and it will actually show my payment history in here. So you get a lot of it. There is nothing wrong with getting all 3 data sources when you're dealing with social media, because you're going to get more and more details with each one of them. So now we're going to do Instagram. So Instagram with option 1, which is through our device acquisition, we still get a ton of different details with it. So we can get our contacts that we've had, any media we've uploaded, the conversations we've done, who we're following, who's following us, all the basics of Instagram. I can get a lot of that off of my logical image associated with the device. My second option available for Instagram is to do a compliance archive, which is our third choice there, where I can log in, I can download the data. I've shown you this example earlier, and then I can process that archive. So now let's look at Twitter. So Twitter, really your best option, because it's not an app that is storing data locally on the device. It is a cloud-based app. So I'm not going to get anything on my option 1, which is my logical or physical acquisitions. I'm going to get the majority of this based on option number 2, which is my cloud choice. That's when I can log in with their credentials. I can see their profile information, the tweets that have been posted, whether or not it was retweeted, how many likes it had, all of that type of metadata or extra data associated with it. I'm going to be able to capture that by being able to authenticate into the cloud and then bring that data down. I do have an option with Twitter to request a compliance archive. It's going to look very similar to what my cloud acquisition will be. It does have a bit more data associated with it because of what they're choosing to store associated with that Twitter account. So I have LinkedIn in here. It's not the most popular of social networks that you saw globally because It's obviously used by professionals, but I think it is an important one for you guys to be aware of. It's also a great one for you to experiment with and play with, because I know everyone probably has a LinkedIn profile. So with LinkedIn, we can get data through a logical acquisition. I can get my profile, all the details with there. I can get my conversations, who I've linked into. All of those details come in with our logical acquisition. Our option number 3 is also available, and this is the one I'm going to encourage all of you to do after Crimes Against Children is over, is that you go into LinkedIn and you request your compliance archive. You can download the free version of E3 and then you can process it, because I'm pretty sure everyone out there has that LinkedIn one. This is going to give you that opportunity to really see what type of information is available to you and kind of practice a little bit, so you can see what is really being left behind. And you can see it has a ton of different things, from comments that were made to different posts you did, to reactions, to receipts if you have purchased anything on there, to different skills section. All of the things that you've input data on LinkedIn, you can pull out from the compliance archive. Our next social media, and I brought this up specifically because this is the Crimes Against Children conference, and you guys are sometimes doing investigations of data on younger people. YouTube is the second most popular search engine in the world next to Google. Technically, it's still a social media platform, because even though people use it to search things, and I even catch myself doing it when I have to figure out how to do something, I will go and look on YouTube. I never thought that would happen. To the time that I spend on Paraben's YouTube channel at Paraben Forensics, we have over 90 videos posted up there now, because we've seen the value of videos and in teaching and really providing content, and how important that can be for each one of you. But YouTube in particular, for a younger generation, when I've talked to my teenage kids, this is their go-to. So it is another social network for them. It's just a different type than a traditional social media. So with YouTube, with option 1, which is our logical acquisition, you get very similar information that you would get from what you would see in an internet history. So we're going to have where they went on YouTube, what their search was, or what the link was to the actual files. And then the big one, how many times they've gone. And this is what really trips up my kids, because they say, I only watched that video once. I don't know what you're talking about. And then I go and look in their YouTube history off of their device, and boom, they've been there like 300 times. So this is something really important for you to watch for. It's a great way that people are now communicating with one another, is they're going to leave comments in each other's YouTube videos. It's kind of that hidden communication option, is to go on YouTube to do it. There is some things that you can do if you want to adjust the way that you're surfing on YouTube, which is go through and adjust your personalized ads on it so that you can control it through your Google settings. Because it really finds everything by your Google account, this is a great way to make sure that you're seeing it in context of maybe your suspect or your victim's eyes. Just turn off your settings so it's not picking up your web history and what you've searched for to feed in the data to your YouTube reviews. Next, we have Snapchat. So Snapchat is, of course, notorious because everyone believes that once data is done with Snapchat, it's gone forever. I have some of my kids that still believe that, which is so ironic because they never pay attention to what their mom does for a living. So with Snapchat, there is data left that you can all capture. So please know that right off the front. With option 1, which is our logical acquisitions associated with our devices, and when I talk about those logical acquisitions, note I'm talking both Android and iOS. You can get information such as the account information, so I'm going to know how I have my account set up, the friends that I have connected to me in Snapchat, any received snaps I have, and then you'll see on these a couple times I have recovered data. Recovered data is data that has been removed out of the app or has cycled through the app, and I can still have access to it later. When dealing with smartphones, we typically don't call it deleted data because technically there really isn't a delete button on your phone. So we always try to review it in context of calling it recovered data. I have two different versions of the Snapchat app up here. So you can see the first version, which is on the left, where I had the account, the friends, and the received snaps and the recovered data. And then the newer version on the right, where I have account, friends, sent snaps, received snaps, and chats. So as the app has added more features, the acquisition details that I get have improved. I always like to manually look at my apps as well as looking at what my tool has parsed for me. So being able to go through and looking at that scary SQLite data, which really are just big looking spreadsheets, is important because it allows me to cross-validate and make sure I'm not missing anything in the process. The one thing that is true about data that comes and gets removed out of Snapchat is a lot of times you will lose those pictures that are sent back and forth. However, just because you've lost the picture doesn't mean you've lost all the data. If I've typed something on top of the picture, like have a great summer, then that data is actually stored separately than the actual image itself. So I can still get that textual data. So those are good things to mental note about Snapchat, that you still can get good information. One of the other nice things is Snapchat hits option 3, which is our compliance archive. You do have the ability to generate a compliance archive with someone's Snapchat credentials. You absolutely want to do it because then you can cross-validate or look at the information from both sources, both the logical examination and that compliance archive, to make sure that you get the most possible information from Snapchat. So those are the majority of our social media archives out there and our social media platforms out there that I wanted to touch on. I want to talk a little bit just really quickly about how apps kind of put out data when they go viral, because there's a lot of changes happening right now where a good majority of the world is functioning in a virtual environment, as far as we're all just kind of living on the internet where we're not in person to one another. Then we need to understand a little bit more what happens when something trends. So this is an older one that trended, but I liked it because it entertained my family for a while. We have kind of a dummy phone that we do a lot of kind of the tests with viral apps on. This was the Face app. It went through, and this is by consent, a picture of my daughter for when she went from her age to being in her 70s, because that's what the app did. When we went through and did all of the research on this, we found that the app was actually designed by Russians, and people had quite the tizzy over it. But then they were like, okay, it was designed by Russians, where is the data? So that's when the cloud comes in and you start wondering, okay, how is this app actually storing the information? It was not storing it on the local device because it actually had to do some AI to be able to make the aging happen. They have stored all the information up in their cloud, which, if we talk about our two types of clouds, this is a private cloud associated with this company. Because they were a European-based company, however, we still were able to do a compliance request. As far as being able to download the data, that was a no. But being able to have your data removed based on their standards, they did have to tell us that yes, your data has been completely removed from the system. Now we are all dealing with the new COVID-19 world, and we have new apps that are trending. So those apps are associated with the COVID tracing. Many of you might be concerned about this just because it is a lot of watching where you're going at all times from your Bluetooth connections, and the whole goal is to be able to contact trace the app. This also does leave new pieces of evidence for us on our devices, and it's something to keep in mind. Typically, most of the COVID tracing is done through either Bluetooth or location services, which is what you see those two icons there for. You'll see that there is, based on what country you're in, There's different capabilities on what you can expect because there are different compliance rules in every country in the world. You'll see more and more data coming from this because it has now been incorporated as far as the base tracking capabilities are incorporated directly into your firmware. So they're directly in iOS and Android. And so it's not something that we get to turn off. And a lot of people don't like this on many levels. So, other things to look at with social media. One of my favorite things that I do when I process different devices is I like to look at an activity timeline, which is everything that the device has been doing at any given time. My user or my suspect cannot change this. It's kind of just a rundown of how this device is running and whether or not the user was interacting. So this way with social media, you kind of know what they were doing. If there's an attack in a particular area and my suspect's device says he was at Twitter at the time, I know, could this be a methodology he was doing to coordinate the attack? So you just need to kind of step back and take a perspective and say, how am I going to go through these steps to do something that changes every second to see what's changing on the device as well? So this is just our virtual conference that's happening this fall in September. So if you're into digital forensics, it's a great opportunity for you to learn more information on what is out there associated with digital device storage. And then here at the end, I have my information. I also have Shannon Gomez, who's my director of sales, just because she's sometimes a little easier to get a hold of than myself. We both typically show up at the Crimes Against Children conference. Like I said, it's always been one of our favorite events, so we're sad we're not going to be there this year, but happy that we can provide you some materials virtually. If you are looking to do social media processing from smartphones, like I said, I have part of the giving back to the community is I've created a free version of the E3 platform that is designed for that very thing. It's designed so that you can process through those social media archives, which was our option number 3. And you can also process with Facebook through the cloud. So if you are interested in either of those two options, you are welcome to email myself at amber@paraben.com, or you can reach out to Shannon. She can also help you just in case I'm delayed in getting your response. You can hit her up at shannon@paraben.com. We are very happy to support the investigative community that helps stop and prevent crimes against children, and we're so happy that we were able to provide this content for you. You are also welcome to follow up with me with any questions, since mine is one of the on-demand recorded sessions. I can't answer the questions for you live, but I am available and happy to answer them via email. Shoot me over an email. Just put in there you have a Crimes Against Children presentation question, and I will get right back to you. I'm happy to do that for you. You can also hit me up on social media, of course, on Twitter at GingerWonderMom, or you can also hit us up at Paraben Corp on Twitter, and we'll answer your questions there. Thank you very much, and I hope you all enjoy investigating social media from smartphones.